We have been in the process of going through 3 episodes. These episodes, I don't know if you're enjoying it, or listening to it, or watching it on YouTube. But I have just really, really liked it. So let me just give you a little overview. We've got Kevin Ezell with us, president of the North American Mission Board. Welcome back, Kevin. This has been fun.
Always great to be with you.
Let me give you a little bit of an overview of where we've gone, and you can go back and listen or view the others. The first one was released on May 12th. The second one came out on May 19th. So you just go 2 weeks back on Revitalize and Replant. We're doing a 3-part series on how churches are growing in a post-COVID world. And just give you an update, maybe you've been with us the whole time, but a little bit of review. This is qualitative research by Church Answers, where we've been trying to find out what's happening in churches that have moved into a growth mode after COVID. We took the first episode to look at the control, the comparison group, the churches that aren't growing. Then in part 2 last week, released on May 19th, if you're looking for it in all the episodes, we talked about attitudes that are taking place in churches that are growing. And now we're going to talk about 5 specific actions. These actions are not comprehensive. You could probably come up with 5 different ones or a list of 10, but this is what we're hearing so far. This is our qualitative research, and so we're going to go to this. Kevin, the first one is this: leading key church members to face reality. You're saying, well, Thom, you've already talked about facing reality as an attitude. This now becomes an action as you bring some people in and say, elders, deacons, staff, whatever the case may be, we need together to face reality. So it becomes an action where you bring them in. And I got to say this, I don't got to say this. I shouldn't even say it. But I hear more and more churches, even post-COVID, using my little book, Autopsy of a Deceased Church,
right,
to face reality. They look at what could happen if they don't make changes very quick. So you bring people together and you face reality. Okay, here's just kind of a example that I want you to give us. You were the brand new pastor at Highview a long time ago. And there was this inadequate interim that had been problems there, but he's gone now, and now you're dealing with staff. And I know that you didn't keep all the staff, but how did you deal with the incoming staff that you're going to be part of the team and those that you retained when you began to say, folks, we've got some issues we got to face? How did you face reality? Because it was a mess.
Right. Well, I had to help them understand reality. You know, they had no sense of reality. It was funny. I was just back there last week because I had to speak. I got to speak at Louisville, the seminary in Louisville, Southern Seminary, and was in the office, and we were talking about those early days, and it was just a matter of just work ethic. I mean, we had some guys that they didn't understand the reality of look, you've got to put in your time, and they just didn't work hard. They didn't have a genuine love, and we transitioned several people because they just did not understand, have a work ethic or a love for people, and so
those are two necessary things to have in church life.
Yeah, but again, you know, when I asked the pulpit committee or different ones, they had no sense at all of what that reality was, and so one of the things we had to do is to confront head on what some of the realities were. I found that some of these guys just didn't get out much. You know, if you don't travel a whole lot, or you just don't realize that other churches have, you know, the shag carpet is still not a thing, you know, and it's like orange. We had orange carpet. It's like,
I remember so well.
Yeah, it's like, look,
there.
The world has moved on, you know, and I could just give you list after list of how they were just stuck in an 8-track world, and we'd already gone to DVDs by that point, you know. And
pre-streaming, folks, just want to let you know.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Listen, when I got there, we didn't have a computer. Our whole membership was on index cards, and they had a memory typewriter was the only thing they had.
Wow.
No, it's amazing. And you're not talking, you know, they'd already invented the internet. Al Gore had already come up with it. And so it's just amazing. But my hardest part was having to sit down, my leaders and say, hey, look, this is a problem. And we've got to, and what was really helpful is the pulpit committee kind of understood that a bit because they had traveled around and saw that churches had moved on and were doing some things far greater than they were.
Oh my goodness. Of course, I have no idea. All I did was love on the baby and knew it was making a mess in its diaper in a lot of places. And I just said, here it is, Kevin, it's yours now.
No, you were great. You know that, but they loved that, but they just didn't understand how bad it was. And my word, what I learned is when we made I felt like we made the right decisions and we went down. We kind of slingshot, the attendance went down because we had several hundred leave. And then it's kind of slingshot where we began to grow pretty fast, but we had to be willing to take the hit, the initial hit.
Wow. Churches that are growing fast are growing, let's just say growing in a post-COVID world, are developing a rhythm of conversion growth. And what I'm hearing, Kevin, is not that just, okay, we're going to have this one push and we've done our evangelism. They have something that is maybe not every week or every month, but they have something that is planned on a regular basis. Evangelism stays at the forefront of the people. Church where my son Jess is pastor, we have 4 emphases a year. I could go through what they are, and it keeps evangelism at the forefront because not a quarter goes by that we're not doing something. Now, there are ways that you can do it every week. You have been a proponent of faith for many years, and it's seasonal because you have faith training and then you have going out, but it's pretty daggum regular, especially if you're having one faith group after another. But the issue here is that there's a rhythm of evangelism and a rhythm of seeking to lead people to Christ, conversion. So that's one of the things we're seeing, Kevin.
No, absolutely. You talk about leading church members to face reality and then transitioning into that rhythm of conversion. I remember having one of my deacons say, well, my word, we're in a pit. We're facing our reality. We're in a pit here. How do you propose we come out of this pit? And I said, look, we're going to baptize our way out of it.
Oh, I like that.
And we're going to just focus on evangelism and tell those stories. And that's when we started. And we're so grateful that faith did come along and jumped on that just a year later. But remind people why we do what we do. They had really become a Church of Jerusalem where they were all about themselves, focused on them. And what's the next quartet we could book to come in to sing to us, and not focus on what's the next thing we could do in our community to reach it.
Oh, you just nailed it there. I mean, let's find out how we can entertain ourselves. Let's find out what we can do to go on our next trip. Let's find out what we can do to get our stuff. And so you have the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I, and it becomes an inwardly focused.
No, absolutely.
So developing a rhythm of conversion growth, moving to more horizontal growth. And now for you listeners and viewers, let me define horizontal growth. Horizontal growth, the way we define it, and it may be defined differently in other places, is having a worship venue other than Sunday morning in your primary worship area. Okay. So it could be another venue. I'm thinking of Southern Hills in Las Vegas that has I believe it's a Chinese service that's a part of their service, but it's on Sunday afternoon. I'm thinking of Highview and how when Kevin was there, they started other campuses. I'm thinking of Jimmy Scroggins and how they've come and rescued several churches that needed rescuing, and they became a part of the church family. I'm thinking about, and I know I'm trying to make myself the hero, but I started multi-site in 1991 and at my church in Birmingham. And I didn't realize either how stupid I was or how far ahead of the curve that was. But horizontal growth means that you're moving to other places to reach people. It's not just one place and one time. You've been a big proponent of that. And it's, you call it revitalize and replant. It happens often in replanting situations. And we of course call it church adoption, but whatever you call it, It's happening big time now, Kevin, and it's really been the lifeblood of many churches.
Right. And you use the term horizontal growth. It also could be just purely missional. I mean, you just got to start thinking instead of how do I grow my church, how do I reach a city? And then
Boom.
when you start reaching the city, the church growth part takes care of itself. It really does. And so that's why we went multiple campuses. It was so that we could reach a city and not just grow a church.
Well, you are dead on that, and I just look at the work of you and Jimmy Scroggins and those that you have influenced. Um, a lot of it is missional. It is missional growth. I use the word horizontal to differentiate it because some people
Sure.
need a word picture. But you're right. It has truly been the lifeblood of many churches.
We, Tom, the reason where I said mission, when people think missional, they often think international missions or North American missions. They forget about local. I mean, local is just a food closet or a clothes closet, but they've got to act like a missionary would if they were in another country. How are we going to reach people? And you're exactly right. The horizontal things you can do outside your doors are what's going to help you do that the fastest.
We talk with a lot of design build firms. We've been spending a lot of time with Amy Brown Church Development Group. Is that the right name of it? Brown Church Development Group in Nebraska, and we've been talking to them, and they said that one of the things that they're turning to more and more is they are doing a lot of reconfiguration of churches, and
Right.
so they're reducing the size of the worship center,
Mm-hmm.
increasing the size of the foyer, the gathering area. They said they're even doing that in growing churches
Mm-hmm.
because the growth is not necessarily taking place in that one service at that one time. So even design build firms are seeing this reality.
No, just talked to a pastor, had an auditorium that seats 3,000. All right, you just got there. They run 300. And it is, I mean, you just walk in. You can imagine the challenge. I mean, there's a tipping point that you need just a mass index. You need body mass.
Yes.
And you're so far from it at that point. That's why I told him, man, I'd have somebody come in there and reconstruct it so that it's not this system. I mean, it's just massive. Or move to the youth facility and start worship there,
Yes.
and just not even try. You're so far away from that body mass tipping point that I just don't know if that's even possible at this point. But it's hard for them to come to that and face that reality.
Pre-COVID, it's been cliche, but there's a lot of truth to it. We said a full service is about 80% of capacity because you'd be really tight if you had 100% of capacity. What
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing right now is more churches are okay, and there's a sense if it's full enough in the 60 to 65% range, and that's really a feature of COVID. That
Yeah.
spreading out a little bit is not that bad, but not 300 and 3,000, not being
Right.
10% occupied.
Right.
That's a whole different story. So, man, there's just so much change going on. Hey, in the last episode, we talked about the attitude of a willingness to deal with toxins. Now we're going to talk about the action. And when we talk about the actions, how let's say I'm going to be a pastor of a 150 attendance church, Kevin, and I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, Most Holy Reverend Doctor Ezel, my church has about 150 in attendance, but we have this one man in the church that is toxic.
Mm-hmm.
He's a control freak. He's run off the previous two pastors. He's now that I'm not yielding to his every whim, he's going to probably run off me. I'm scared if I do something and try to confront him, I'll lose a third of my church. He said, I think 50 people maybe will follow him.
Yeah.
Walk through. I've had this conversation with you, Kevin. I'm the pastor. Walk through how you would respond to that.
I would deal with it tomorrow. The guy's a bully, and you probably have more church people in the church that are tired of him being a bully than you would realize. I
There's one
had a
good
lady
point.
that my very first churches, she told Billy Woodard, one of my main deacons, you tell the pastor it's in his best interest not to do, and she mentioned something. And
Whoa.
I said, well, Billy, you go back and tell her it's in her best interest not to tell me what's in my best interest, you know? And I remember when Billy's like, you sure, Pastor? I said, no, you tell her exactly what I said. Then he left the office. I'm like, oh my word. This may cost me, but it's just not worth it. At some point, and you've got to just man up here, and it'd be much freer for you to deal with that than to be drug along for months and perhaps years of ineffective ministry because you're trying to cater to somebody. And
Would you recommend that pastor get someone to go with him? What are some of the process issues? I mean, this pastor doesn't know anything. Kevin Ezel's confronted a few people, so he's got a little bit of background in it. But this is Pastor Joe. What's his next step?
That's true. You wouldn't want to go alone because, again, people like that are not always known to tell the truth either. So I would take someone with me. But depending on how long you've been there, normally by then you've been able to connect with enough of the people in the church to get a good sense of what's going on. What I found as a young pastor is you look at the constitution and bylaws of a church, and that'd be on paper. But there was actually a way the church was ran that was not on paper. And some guys would just go by the written version. They get there and realize, man, that's not how it works at all. It's actually this family runs this. And that's when it can be difficult, when it's not just one, but when it's a whole family, a family tree that just kind of chokes the life out of a church. You got to find that stuff out before you go there. But I would confront it, but always have somebody there with you. But I found some guys get real cowardly, when you go in a room and, man, you think they're with you and they're not. Even some of the best leaders, John MacArthur tells a story about how he was going through a real difficult time in his church, and he brought his 3 best leaders in and said, look, this has been a tough time. I don't know how I'd have made it through if I hadn't had you guys, you guys having my back. I don't know what I'd done. The leader of the 3 said, well, John, if you think we've got your back, you've got something else coming. And I was like, oh my word! I didn't realize how bad it really was. The 3 guys I was depending on didn't have my back, and but he made it through it, obviously. But it can be tough, because even the best can be snowed sometimes, and not count the count the situation like it really is.
You said in a previous podcast in this series that when pastors finally take the action of dealing with toxicity in the church, a toxic person, that is often common that they wake up the next morning or the next week and say, I wish I'd done this sooner.
Absolutely. And I've never woke up the next day thinking, I wish I waited. It's always like, I cannot believe I would have had this feeling a year ago. It's like dealing with staff that's not helpful or so I've just learned the quicker you can go to deal with the thing, the better. And it's all in timing. You've got to have some judgment and discernment there, but it grieves me to see guys 3 and 4 and 5 years putting up with things that are not in the best interest of their church, just because again they're fearful or scared in some way, and it's just not a way to live. I mean, you got a limited amount of time on this earth, a limited amount of time to make a difference, and they need to. People are dying and going to hell every day. Yes, our churches aren't what they should be because we're running and cowering in the corner somewhere because somebody's threatened to hold their tithe, And I remember I had a laminated sheet on my desk of the 5 churches near us that I recommended. And I'd give that out and just say, look, we may have to start looking elsewhere. Well, if you do, here's 5 I'd recommend. These guys are incredible.
I was talking to a pastor in Georgia, great pastor in Georgia. And basically his church and another church, they happen to be part of the Church Answers community, his church and another church, they always recommend each other because they say, hey, I love this pastor. He's as good as I am. And it's not some kind of reciprocal relationship to tit for tat, if you will. It's just they know how strong that church is. And so they say, yeah,
Right.
go to this church. All right, no, go to that church. So
Yeah.
they recycle between the two of them.
Right.
Hey, this last point is developing a sustainable plan for the long term. And I probably got a little complex here. I used a little bit of the business nomenclature that maybe is not good for most of our listeners and viewers on this. I said, focusing more on the lag action than the lead action. You need to focus on the lead action. Those are the things you do. Like, hey, if we're going to see 30 people won to Christ, that's the lag. I mean, that's what you'll ultimately get. Then we have to do the following. That's the lead. Many times we set a goal, but we don't say how we're going to do there. In this case, in the long term, we need to keep a focus upon, okay, we're going to reach at least 30 people a year and just keep it before us. And therefore, all the lead actions will come along. That's a little bit like number 2, developing a rhythm of conversion growth is basically making sure that you always have a plan to reach beyond yourself. Maybe I should have said it that simply. Having a plan to reach beyond yourself on an ongoing basis. Long-term plan to reach beyond yourself. Am I making no sense whatsoever?
No, I totally understand. It reminds me of that passage in Acts 18, 9 and 10, where Paul is discouraged and the Lord comes to him in a vision. He says, do not be afraid. Keep on speaking and don't be silent. Don't quit. And the two things there is don't be afraid and don't quit. Do not be afraid. Or actually says stop being afraid and do not quit. And then he says, for I am with you. And basically that's the part. And I think you have to come up with a plan that you realize. And if you really feel it's a God-given plan, don't be afraid. Do not quit. Stay focused on that long-term plan. You're exactly right. You've got to have a plan. Even if it ends up changing some, you got to have a plan to change. And so I think that's so critical, almost to lead with that. Excellent. Sorry to use scripture. I know that was probably.
At Church Answers, we do not mind the occasional use of scripture, so thank you for that. Hey, thank you, listeners. That was a joke. Don't send me an email. Thank you, listeners and viewers, for being a part of this series. Just a reminder, this is the third of a 3-part series on how churches are growing in a post-COVID world. In the first episode, we looked at the comparison and control group, churches that aren't. Then we looked at the attitudes of leaders of growing churches. And today we looked at the actions. I'm very grateful to Kevin Ezell for offering his wisdom and counsel and just all that he has in leadership for these 3 and always. And Amy reminded me it wasn't too long ago, we passed 250 episodes of Revitalize and Replant. It's gone by quickly, but it's been a blessing, Kevin. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're a machine. That's only a small part of what you do. So I appreciate the opportunity.
It's a major part of what I want to do, though. So thank you. And thank you, listeners. Thank you, viewers, for being here at Revitalize and Replant. Hey, for you watching on YouTube, subscribe to us. The rest of you, wherever you're listening on your podcast app, give us a rating and review. That keeps us before people. This is a ministry that is provided at the joyous, complimentary provision of the North American Mission Board. So take advantage of it. It's a great ministry, and we thank you for it. And we'll be back every week as we continue to help churches get healthier as they revitalize and replant.